All right, so you guys obviously know Sam Harris. You know the intellectual dark web, which, by the way, has actually gone a lot down. That whole intellectual dark web group has really just kind of faded away. It seems like no one cares about that anymore, nor does it really seem to exist anymore. And it was only founded like a year ago. That was it. So hasn't really been all that long. It's been like literally a couple months over a year. So 14, 15 months that it's been in existence. But what we're actually going to be getting into here is about Sam Harris because he's a little bit different than some of the other more the major intellectual dark web members. And we're going to kind of get into his relationship with Dave Rubin as well as Jordan Peterson in this. And we're going to do a little bit of a sort of, I don't know, mini deep dive, if you will. But before I get into that, I want to say that I'm on Patreon at patreon.com/theprogressivevoice. And over there, I am posting patron-only content for people who are patrons. So we got a video about Destiny going after Kyle Kalinske that's open just for patrons. Video about the irony of David Pakman's exponential channel growth down here. And I will be posting more of that good content over there. So you definitely want to go check that out. So if you would like to support the show, go over to patreon.com/theprogressivevoice. And I want to give a thank you to Nicholas Alexander Garcia, H.S. Ross, Cody Soyland, Evan Bowman, and Robbie Ravenwood for all becoming patrons over at patreon.com/theprogressivevoice. So go check that out if you do want to check out exclusive content. With that said, let's get back to the video. So, I saw this post over on Reddit that really, really piqued my interest a lot. Because, if you don't know, for a long time, really ever since Dave Rubin made his flip to the right wing, Sam Harris subreddit fans have not been a fan of Dave Rubin. They've been going after him ever since, and they really have been disliking him. There have been a lot of threads about how Dave Rubin went down under. And so this Reddit post that I'm going to read to you, it's titled, "To those worried about Sam's support for Rubin, they're clearly keeping some distance." So if you don't remember the genesis of Sam Harris and Dave Rubin's relationship, Dave Rubin owes the kickoff of his show to Sam Harris. So what you'll notice of Dave Rubin is he's a trend hopper. So he sees who's popular at the time, uses them for clout, and then moves on, ditches them once he's done using them for all that he could pull out of them, and then he leaves them alone. What are some examples of that to prove my theory? Sam Harris is one example. Again, he literally owes Sam Harris the credit for the kickoff of this man's show, because what happened in the beginning of the show? His first thing that he does, like major thing that he does for the Rubin Report, is interview with Sam Harris after the whole Real Time with Bill Maher debate on Muslims. And that, goes crazy, and it feeds into Dave Rubin's narrative. It's the original feeder for Dave Rubin's narrative of like, look, the left has gone crazy, they don't support free speech, they've gone insane, yada, yada, yada. That set up the whole ring for what he's doing. So Dave Rubin not only rode that trend hard, guys, that was the kickoff of the man's show, but he hopped on his trend. Now he doesn't care about Sam Harris. Then remember when he was hanging out with Milo Yiannopoulos a lot, having Milo on his show, going to college campuses, speaking with Milo. Is he talking to Milo now that Milo is no longer financially and brand-wise beneficial? He's not, because he's a trend hopper. And then the other person now is Jordan Peterson. Now, he hasn't left Jordan Peterson just yet because he's too busy sucking all the money he can out of Jordan Peterson by, and this is an objective analysis, by the way, that he just goes in, does a dumb opening for Jordan Peterson's shows, and that's all he does. And he makes a bunch of money doing it. And you don't have to take my word for it. Take the word of the, Jordan Peterson superfan who I did a video on, who said the exact same thing about Dave Rubin, saying that they would be embarrassed to be Dave Rubin. So he's a trend hopper. But this post says, basically every other day, there's a thread about Rubin doing something stupid and concern about Sam's relationship to Rubin. I listened to parts of Rubin's book reveal yesterday, and among other things, it becomes very clear that they're not as close anymore for everybody who takes an honest look and isn't just concern trolling. Dave appeared on Sam's podcast almost 2 years ago. Sam last appeared on Rubin's show more than 1 year ago. Other IDW members have made frequent appearances since then. When Dave talked about his book and listed people who have been treated unfairly by SJW in his opinion, he mentions that Google guy, tells semi-accurate stories about Jordan Peterson and Brett Weinstein, but noticeably doesn't mention Sam Harris. Previously, Sam being treated unfairly by Cenk was his go-to story, which allegedly caused him to start all of this, his own show, realizing how bad the left is. Then he shows some advanced praise printed on the cover and notes that there's approval from Jordan Peterson, Shapiro, Carlson, Peter Thiel, Larry Elder, but again, missing is Sam Harris. Sam did write advanced praise for Peter Boghossian's upcoming book, though, and also tweeted about it, but not about Rubin's book. To everybody taking a somewhat charitable look, it should be clear that there's significantly more distance between their public personas than 12 months ago. Rubin also praises Jordan Peterson a lot and thanks him for everything. It sort of sounds like he's replaced Harris as Dave's intellectual in some sense. He's openly naming clear-cut right-wingers as his friends now when he talks about conversations, and became really unhinged with his pro-Trump tweets, including friendly interactions with Donald Jr. All this looks like Rubin's embracing being on the right and even Trumpian right more openly, while Sam isn't willing to follow him there. So this is a really on-point, detailed breakdown of the situation between Sam Harris and Dave Rubin. And so, yeah, like, Sam hasn't appeared on Rubin's show in over a year, and I guess Dave was on Sam's podcast like over 2 years ago. So they're clearly not on friendly terms, but this is not something that just happened randomly. In fact, this is a quote, folks, that is literally from the original Intellectual Dark Web article. So Barry Weiss, who is the one of the op-ed writers over at New York Times, wrote this article. Talking about the Intellectual Dark Web. This was the foundation of the Intellectual Dark Web. It was the founding of the Intellectual Dark Web. And here's a quote from Sam. He said, quote, "There are a few people on this network who have gone without saying anything critical about Trump, a person who has assaulted truth more than anyone in human history," Mr. Harris said. Quote, "If you care about the truth, that is quite strange." That is coming from Sam Harris himself. So this is, if you don't know who he's talking about, because it's very obvious, because there are a few people in that freaking network, which are actually, what's funny is, Ben Shapiro will time to time throw in a critique of Donald Trump. Dave Rubin never does it. Jordan Peterson never does it. So the two people he's speaking about there are Dave Rubin and Jordan Peterson, very clearly. It's very obvious, because those are the two people in the Intellectual Dark Web who 100% refuse to be critical of Donald Trump. Shapiro will sometimes throw in some sort of a random criticism, but sometimes he's also just straight up, supporting him and endorsing him, like when he was appointing all those conservative Supreme Court justices, those two Supreme Court justices. So that's a direct quote from him right from the jump. So someone also linked this really interesting audio file that we're going to look at here. It's from Mr. Harris. Let's hear him out.
Do you see any downside to your association with the Intellectual Dark Web? Yeah, I think I probably do. That's why I've always taken it as fairly tongue-in-cheek and not made much of it. Many of the people who are lumped into this group are people who I like and am happy to collaborate with. But as to whether the concept of this group is an advantage for any of us, I remain fairly agnostic. Right, I'm happy to play with the idea. I don't tell Eric Weinstein to shut up when he uses the phrase, but I haven't been inclined to make much of it myself.
So what's clear from that clip that you guys just saw right there is that Sam Harris never really seemed to like the concept of the Intellectual Dark Web, let alone the people in it. He likes some of the people in it. He references there Brett Weinstein as one of the guys that he likes. The Weinstein bros are the token liberals in that squad. And Harris is thrown in from time to time too, but mainly it's the Weinstein bros that are the token liberal progressives. So those are going to be the people that Sam is more cool with, because they're down to critique Trump and stuff like that. So it's pretty interesting because it makes it clear that he actually doesn't really like the Intellectual Dark Web, and he doesn't really like the people in it. And it makes sense because, Sam is probably the weirdest guy on the planet. And what I mean by that is he's so he just seems to be so volatile and just so dynamic in so many different takes. Like, in one hand, he's defending Charles Murray, and then on the other hand, he's calling out Brett Kavanaugh and, the amazing... That segment he did on Brett Kavanaugh, I mean, dude, there's no better breakdown of that entire Kavanaugh situation than Sam Harris gave. And then he calls out Trump, but sometimes for the wrong reasons, although, he talks about... Some of them I think are more abstract issues that I find to be definitely legitimate issues. So when he talks about how, we're kind of desensitized to lies nowadays, he's definitely on point with that. but some of that stuff has to do with like the Russia stuff, and so it's not so much about like, oh, he's not for Medicare for all and stuff like that. On the other hand, he endorsed Hillary over Bernie, and he's so weird, man. But to me, I think the bad outweighs the good when it comes to Sam, and so at that point, I think that's where I group him in. I think the bad, slightly or a decent amount outweighs the good. I think for me, the kicker was when the kicker either hit when he was defending Charles Murray on the garbage that he was saying in his debate with Ezra Klein, or it hit when he said that the Democrats need a young Bloomberg. Because the idea that the Democrats need a young Bloomberg, anybody uttering that just shows a very big lack of political analysis and political understanding to a level in which it really can't be reached. Honestly, it's pretty remarkable to me. But to also look at something else. Here, this was actually from, I believe this was about a year ago as well, if I'm not mistaken. I think I did a video about this like a year ago. So he actually also went after Jordan Peterson by saying this, quote, "If I have any disagreement with Jordan on this front, it does come down to, as far as I know, he has said very little in criticism of Trump, which may signify nothing, but it strikes me as peculiar. And I know his fan base is filled with Trump supporters, and he's done far less than I have to make it uncomfortable for the Trump supporters in his fan base." So this is another example of, and actually another point I want to make as well is that I don't know when the last time was that Jordan and Sam have done something public together. So let me know in the comment section, because I forgot when the last time was that they actually spoke or had event of some sort. I know that they went on that really long tour, but ever since that ended, I'm not really sure, when the last time they collabed was. Jordan is also fading a little bit in terms of popularity. He seems to be less controversial nowadays. He's not really putting out as many controversial takes, I guess. But, he clearly does not agree with Jordan Peterson, Dave Rubin, and obviously Ben Shapiro. He's disagrees with on a bunch of stuff. But, what's also weird about Sam is he's for a universal basic income. So, again, you get some goods and you also get some bad. So it's how do you measure whether you like this guy or not? It's so difficult. But again, I think the bad's at least slightly outweighs the good. But he clearly doesn't like Jordan Peterson on this issue, at least, But he definitely doesn't like Dave Rubin, as a personality, in terms of his political positions. I don't know how Sam feels about Dave as a person, but what is very clear to me is that he doesn't really, he's distanced himself from Dave Rubin, and so that Reddit post was basically addressing the fact that there are a lot of Sam Harris subreddit fans who have been, hey, why don't you go after Dave Rubin for what he's doing? It's irresponsible for you not to, push back and check him on his lies, which is totally true, 100%. And the fact that he doesn't go after Donald Trump, his extreme inconsistencies. And so Sam has chosen instead to kind of do the every once in a while critique, in an interview or, in a podcast soundbite, etc., etc. So, this quote about Jordan Peterson. Jordan Peterson, by the way, he's a really big coward. Recall when he said that Brett Kavanaugh should step down if he were to be appointed, and then the right-wing mob came after him, and then he capitulated, when his whole claim to fame was supposed to be that he never does that. He never capitulates to the mob, but he did. And that's because they were going to start pulling his funding, and he's going to get less popular. That dude, by the way, he makes 7 to 10 million a year, maybe even more, especially when he's running that, that fake college scam. But listen, man, Sam Harris, he's kind of faded a lot. I don't really hear much about Sam Harris. From time to time, we'll hear something from him, but I got to tell you the truth. I don't really hear all that much from Sam Harris nowadays. Same thing with Jordan Peterson. But that looks to be the situation between Sam Harris, the intellectual dark web, Jordan Peterson, and Dave Rubin. Let me know your thoughts on all this down below. Very curious to hear them.